Felicitous greetings, fellow fanatics.
Welcome back, one and all. I'm Fanatic, and today we're taking a look at Legendary, a Marvel deck building game, a semi-cooperative superhero-themed deck builder by Upper Deck. Legendary has been out for a little over a decade at this point, with expansions still coming out to this day. But is it still worth getting into as a newcomer? As someone who just picked it up last year, let's find out together. But before we get started, what's your favorite superhero? Let me know in the comments down below, and then let's dive in. First released in November of 2012, Legendary, a Marvel deck building game released while the first Avengers film was still fresh in everyone's mind. Though most of the time it'll be referred to as Legendary Marvel, Marvel Legendary, or even just Legendary. In Legendary, 2 to 5 players will be competing to score the most points by defeating villains and rescuing bystanders. Players can't get too competitive though. There's a mastermind leading the evil forces which is constantly working toward a specific goal. If they fulfill their wicked scheme, then all players lose regardless of victory points. Thus, players need to strike a balance between trying to get the most victory points and helping other players just enough to take out the mastermind. To set up, you'll begin by taking the mastermind and their 4 tactics cards. Take the tactics and shuffle them, placing them beneath the mastermind. After that, choose what scheme the mastermind will be attempting to fulfill. The scheme will instruct you to include a certain number of scheme twist cards in the villain deck. Start constructing that by mixing those cards with 5 master strike cards. You'll also need to take a number of bystanders, henchmen groups, and villain groups according to the number of players. I won't be going into the full details of this here, but understand that villain groups represent powerful underlings, henchmen represent groups of faceless mooks, and bystanders are those that are threatened by them. If you refer back to the mastermind, you'll notice that there's a line that starts with always leads. This villain group is closely tied to the mastermind in question, will always be involved in any game which they're in. Now, shuffle the villain deck and place the remaining bystanders in a stack for future use. You'll also need to place stacks for wounds and officers, which likewise will be used as the game goes on. Next, you'll construct a deck of 5 heroes with 14 cards each. For this example, I'm using the suggested first game setup, but generally, you're supposed to make all the aforementioned choices at random if playing by rules as written. Shuffle everything together and deal the top 5 cards to the HQ. Finally, each player needs a starter deck of 8 shield agents and 4 shield troopers. Shuffle these together and then each player draws 6 cards. Choose a player to go first and you're ready to begin. Turn structure is fairly simple. At the beginning of a player's turn, they flip over the top card of the villain deck. If it's a villain, including a henchman, it'll enter the city. When this happens, place the card into the sewers. If there are already villains in the city, you'll move them as needed to make room. So in this case, Doc Ock and Viper will both move forward to make room for Venom. Keep in mind that a villain only advances if they must do so to make room for a new villain. Since we started with a gap, the endless armies of Hydra do not advance. If you ever reach a point where all 5 spaces are full and another villain needs to be placed, then the villain on the bridge will escape and the others will advance as normal. If the villain escapes, the active player must choose one of the heroes in the HQ and KO it, removing it from the game. Furthermore, if the villain escapes with any hostages, each player must discard 1 card from their hand. Of course, villains aren't the only thing to come out of the villain deck. If you draw a bystander, that means they've been captured. Place them under the rightmost villain card. If no villains are currently in the city, they'll be captured by the mastermind instead. We'll discuss how to rescue bystanders once we get to playing your cards. There are 2 other things that are likely to come out of the villain deck. If you draw a Master Strike, you'll resolve the card as instructed on the mastermind you're currently fighting. In this case, Red Skull forces each player to KO a hero from their hand, so they'll each choose 1 card and permanently remove it from their deck. Finally, you may happen upon a scheme twist. When this happens, you'll look at the current scheme card and do as it instructs. Since we're using Unleash the Power of the Cosmic Cube, if it's one of the first few schemes to go in the pile, it'll do nothing. But later on, it'll start adding wounds to the player's decks, which are dead cards that will waste space in your hand. After resolving the villain card, you'll be able to play the cards in your hand. You can play them in any order you wish, and Legendary is a game where that order will often matter greatly. At the onset, you'll have the aforementioned shield agents, which give you 1 purchase power each, represented by a star, and shield troopers, which give you 1 attack power each, represented by the claw slash. To purchase a card, choose a hero from the HQ and pay the cost in the lower right corner of the card. When you purchase a card, you place it into your discard pile and immediately draw from the HQ to replace it. Alternatively, you always have the option to purchase shield officers, which cost 3 and give you 2 recruit power when played, a simple but effective upgrade over the agents. As the game goes on, you're likely to get a wide variety of different hero cards in your deck. We certainly don't have time to go over everything, but you should be aware of how superpowers work. Firstly, know that most hero cards have a team icon and a type icon. Teams in the base game include S.H.I.E.L.D., the Avengers, X-Men, and the Spider-Friends. Meanwhile, there are 6 types: Covert, Instinct, Ranged, Strength, and Technology. And do note that gray cards without one of these 5 symbols are considered their own type. Many cards will have a superpower icon, which gives it an extra effect if you've played a card of the matching team or type earlier in your turn. So with this hand, if you were to play Covering Fire first, you'd get the bonus when you play Endless Invention. Alternatively, if you play Endless Invention first, you'd get Covering Fire's bonus, but you wouldn't be able to get both of them this turn. If you had another tech card in your hand, such as Spider-Man's Web Shooters, you could play that first to get the tech bonus for both of them in that same turn. Of course, recruiting heroes is only half of the game. You also need to defeat villains if you intend to win. When you defeat a villain, you place it into your victory pile, along with any bystanders they may have taken hostage. If fighting the Mastermind, you'll take one of their tactics cards, then reveal and resolve it. It's the last Mastermind tactic, then the day has been saved, and the players will advance to the Showdown round, which we'll get to in a moment. But first, it's important to understand keywords. Like many card games, Legendary uses keywords to shorten commonly used abilities and reuse them on multiple cards. Over the course of different sets, many different keywords have appeared. There's 4 in particular that you should know even if playing only with the first set. KO permanently removes a card from your deck. If you're told to KO a card, but it doesn't specify where from, then it may either be a card in your hand or one that you've played this turn. The next 3 work very similarly to one another and appear on different villain cards. Ambush effects happen immediately when that villain first enters the city. Escape effects happen when that villain escapes. This is in addition to the standard penalties for the villain escaping. And finally, fight happens when that villain is defeated. After a player's turn is over, they discard all cards that they've played and that remain in their hand, and then draw a new hand of 6 cards. Play passes to the next player and continues like this until one of a handful of different end conditions happen. If the Schemer Mastermind has an evil wins condition that's fulfilled, then the game ends in a loss for all players. If either the villain or hero deck runs out, the Mastermind escapes, but the heroes have thwarted their scheme, and the player with the most VP in their victory pile wins. If the Mastermind's final tactic is defeated, then the game goes into the final showdown. When this happens, players will play out one final round, with each player gaining one more turn, including the player that just hit the Mastermind. In this round, you no longer play villain cards nor recruit heroes. Instead, you simply play out your entire hand and add up both your recruit and attack power into a single total. Whichever player has the highest total scores the final hit against the Mastermind and takes the Mastermind card into their victory pile. Then, players count up their victory points as usual. I should briefly note that in the core set, each hero only has a single piece of art for their cards. Luckily, all future sets fixed this misstep and had unique art for every card. Within the core set, you get a total of 15 heroes. And Upper Deck really didn't pull any punches here. They went with a lot of heavy hitters right out of the gate. The game came with all 6 Avengers from the first movie. Yes, I am aware that the original comic had a different lineup, but as per the MCU version, these were the original Avengers. In addition, you had 6 of the X-Men, and again, most of these are big names. Emma Frost is a bit of an odd choice compared to the others, but the rest are major names of the franchise. And then, to further round things out, it included Nick Fury, Spider-Man, and Deadpool. And this trend continued with the game's first expansion, Dark City, which rounded out the roster with additional X-Men as well as a number of other popular characters such as Blade, Daredevil, and the Punisher.
That brings us to the expansions, and the short version is that Upper Deck has released over 24 expansions for Legendary Marvel over the years. Some of these represent specific teams of superheroes such as Fantastic Four, Guardians of the Galaxy, while others represent specific storylines from the comics, such as Civil War or World War Hulk. Are all wars in Marvel named after real-world wars? Regardless, I have 3 expansions myself. Dark City and Secret Wars Volume 1 are both large expansions, while Paint the Town Red is a small expansion that focuses on Spider-Man side characters.
Out of these, I'd say that Dark City and Secret Wars are must-haves. They both do a great job of filling in gaps from the base game's roster, while Secret Wars also introduces sidekicks. Like Officers, these are always available for purchase. They only cost 2 and allow you to draw 2 cards when played,
effectively giving you one extra play. Catch is that when a sidekick is played, it's returned to the sidekick stack rather than going to your discard at the end of the turn. There is a ton out there at this point, and I'm certainly not going to try and collect it all. However, I am hoping that some of the harder to find large expansions get reprints, and I am considering picking up some of the small expansions in the future. And while they're not expansions, it should also be noted that the Legendary system has been adapted to other franchises, including James Bond, Alien, and an upcoming Matrix set, just to name a few. So all in all, does Marvel Legendary still hold up today? As aforementioned, the choice of heroes is absolutely top-notch. Obviously, the landscape of which Marvel heroes are popular and which ones aren't has shifted over the last decade, especially thanks to the film franchise. But at the time, this was the best they had to offer, and it's still a very strong selection. As for the gameplay, it's pretty solid. The way you build combos is fairly intuitive, and there's a lot of variety in there, both with heroes and villains alike. On the downside, because the difficulty is largely tied to the villain deck and how quickly scheme twists come out, you can get an unfair game if a lot of them end up stacked near the top. I prefer something more like the Transformers deck building game, where you stack the deck so that bosses come out within a certain window of time. I'm also not fond of selecting things completely at random, but most players house rule that out anyways. The other thing I'm not entirely fond of is the semi-cooperative nature of the game. It really does clash with the theme. Heroes should not be glory hounding while Galactus is trying to eat the planet. It sounds simple enough to ignore this rule, and at the beginning, many players did just that. However, this led to the misconception that the base game is extremely easy. Legendary is meant to be a competitive game. When you take this away from it, the base game masterminds are indeed a cakewalk. Although it should be noted that when Dark City released as the game's first expansion, Upper Deck designed the new masterminds with this complaint in mind. As a result, you have some very powerful foes in there to face, such as Apocalypse. Despite all this, Legendary remains one of the classics of the deck building genre and has influenced many games that have come since then. Some of the expansions are very difficult to get these days, but even if you only get one or two of them, it still feels like a very robust game. In conclusion, I find Legendary, a Marvel deck building game, to be worthy of a respectable 8.3 out of 10. And I would like to take a few moments to give a brief thanks to Shannon Franklin. As with the case that I keep my Star Wars LCG collection in, she did a wonderful job turning this formerly generic trading card box into a thematic representation of Legendary with what I see as Marvel's most iconic heroes and villains. If you're interested in purchasing Legendary, my first suggestion is to check with your friendly local game store to see if they keep it in stock. If you can't find it there, or simply wish to learn more, links are included in the description. But what about you? What do you think of Legendary? What superhero-themed games do you enjoy? If you have any questions, remarks, or opposing points of view, leave them in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. And if you really enjoy my work, please consider funding my channel on Patreon. Until next time, farewell, fellow fanatics. Thank you again for watching. I have plenty more to share with you if you're interested. You can click up here above my head to subscribe to my channel. You can click over here on my monitor to see the most recent video that I've worked on. Or if you prefer, you can click up here to open this mysterious vault and see what video that the YouTube algorithm has picked just for you.